Hey, hi everyone. We are going to talk today about our masterclass, which is all to do with blood sugar and the link between blood sugar and hormones. So thanks for coming along and listening to the masterclass. So I just wanted to explain who I am. And so I am Ophelia Kotrova. I have been a teacher, primary school teacher for about 9-ish years. And I am a mother to two, and I have had my fair share of fertility struggles, miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, all the fun things, and eczema throughout my life. And this has led me down the path of learning about the impact of nutrition, blood sugar balance, and how that impacts our health, our well-being, and most importantly, how it affects our hormones and our fertility. So today, what we're wanting to learn is we're wanting to learn about how everything in the body is connected and how there isn't one process in the body that isn't affected by another. So blood sugar is the pillar to health. It's the pillar to fertility, to hormonal balance, pillar to wellness. Okay, so we're going to go through what's blood sugar, what systems are affected, how does it affect you, how can you regulate it, and then I really hope that you have some key takeaway things that you can try at home to help regulate your blood sugar as soon as your next meal. Okay, so I want you to think about, like, where are you right now with your health, your energy, your moods? Are you finding that you are irritable? Are you finding your moods up and down? What's your focus, memory, concentration like? Where's your hormonal health at? Do you have really long cycles? Do you have heavy periods? Do you have short cycles? Is your period quite scant? What's your weight been doing recently? Is that something that has fluctuated? Are you happy with where that's at the minute? And then generally, like, what's your vitality? Are you bursting out of bed in the morning with energy and, living each day with high energy, ready to go? All right, so blood sugar, it impacts so many things because it's a pillar to health. And these are just some of the things that we see that are affected by blood sugar. So obviously all to do with hormonal health, but we get things like thyroid, hair loss, our stress response, like how resilient we are to stress, our cravings, our sleep quality, mood disturbances, like skin health, all of the things. Okay, so what is blood sugar and how does it work? So when we eat some food, particularly carbohydrates, digestion begins in our mouth, goes down to our stomach, and that digestion is continued, and it is broken down into smaller molecules. And one of those molecules is called glucose. And glucose will then enter into the bloodstream. Now, the role of the pancreas here is to secrete insulin so that it can move the glucose from the bloodstream into the cell where it is in that usable space. Okay, so we have a picture of a cell here, and we've got insulin and the receptor there, as well as the channel. So insulin is like the key, and the receptor is like the lock. So when insulin comes onto the receptor, it like the lock, it then opens it up and opens the channel, therefore letting the glucose actually enter the cell, okay, which is really important. We need that. And then what happens, it takes it to our muscles, and our muscles can store and use glucose. And it can also go to our liver as well, which helps to store glucose, okay? But what happens is, so here we have a healthy cell with insulin, okay? It's all working beautifully. But what happens is if we become not as sensitive to insulin, or if there's not enough insulin present, we don't have that lock and key effect, which then opens up the channel to the cell to allow the glucose to enter into the cell. So this process of insulin being secreted by the pancreas and our cells' sensitivity to that is really important. So why do we need glucose? Well, we need it because our cells use it for energy. So if you think of every organ, so our brain, our muscles, our heart, liver, ovaries, every single one of these are made up of tiny little cells, and they need glucose to be able to have energy, to be able to repair, to be able to actually carry out their cellular function. Okay, so without glucose, we don't have any energy to do anything. So you might have seen a video an image like this before, talking about the blood sugar roller coaster. So I'm going to explain it so you understand. So we've got blood sugar level and time, and we've got in the green here is this ideal balanced blood sugar range. And you can see this red being the spike and crash. So what happens is after we've eaten a meal, okay, we might have this, ideal range. Then, this might be some extended period of time. So this might have been when we were asleep. And then, okay, we eat breakfast. Now, what happens is in most people in Australia, around the world, are eating some breakfasts that are high carbohydrates with no protein, no fiber. And what happens is if a meal is high in carbohydrates, it's really easily broken down. And when it's really easily broken down, it is able to enter the bloodstream really, really quickly, which is why we see this really rapid increase, okay? And what happens then, insulin is then secreted by the pancreas because it detects there's high blood sugar, and it creates a lot of insulin, which then takes the blood sugar down really quickly, moves it into the cell really quickly, okay? And we get this crash. So we get this crash of low blood sugar here out of that ideal range, okay? So what happens then, our body says, okay, we need to eat because our blood sugar is not, high enough. So we start craving things like carbohydrates, like those quick energy things, muesli bars, Mars bars, all of those things, because it's what our body can break down really quickly. We then increase really quickly because we've eaten something that is broken down really fast. And again, insulin will secrete it and we get this roller coaster, okay? Okay, now continuous large fluctuations of this roller coaster spike is what is inflammatory, okay, and is what is not ideal or healthy. What you can see in the green here is what we ideally want, okay, because we need our blood glucose to rise a little bit. But you can see that instead of it increasing so sharply, it's a much steadier increase and a much steadier decrease. So instead of this roller coaster of too much glucose and then too little glucose in the bloodstream, we get this beautiful increase and decrease, okay? So it is normal for blood glucose to increase, but what's not normal is these fluctuations and this roller coaster. Okay, so insulin resistance, let's talk about it. So in a normal cell on the left here, we have the glucose and we've got insulin, which then allows the glucose to enter into the cell. But in a cell that has become insulin resistant, so it's no longer as sensitive to insulin, the insulin will be present, but perhaps it's not working as well, and therefore we don't get as much glucose entering into the cell and it stays elevated in the bloodstream. And what happens is, because we lose that sensitivity to insulin, this is where this sort of inflammatory sort of cascade starts to occur. So insulin resistance is the first step to diabetes. So you can be insulin resistant without being diabetic, but it's like the number one step. And a lot of people are in this like insulin resistant stage without even realizing it. So again, to reiterate, it's a normal, healthy part of digestion when we have our blood glucose increase. But what isn't normal is these spikes and these crashes, okay? We want insulin to be able to come onto the receptor to then allow that to come through, okay? So what tests can you do? There's a test called HbA1c, and that'll tell you that the percentage will tell you, where you are at over the last 3 months, okay? And I'll often see clients come in and they're perhaps not in the diabetic level. So they've gone to the GP, got the results. The GP said nothing about it. But when they come to see me, it's nearing that pre-diabetes range. And so my theory on this is like, why would we want to fix it when it's in a pre-diabetes range? Like, why wouldn't we want it to come back to a much more healthier, optimal level instead of, reacting when it comes to this disease state? Okay, so another blood test that you can do, it's called the fasting blood glucose, and this looks at the test. So it's a fasting one, so you fast overnight and then in the morning go and get it tested, and this looks at your blood glucose overnight. And again, like sometimes people will come in and say, oh, my doctor never mentioned anything, it must be fine, but it may not be in that optimal level. So another way also that you can, assess whether you have insulin resistant, and something you can do at home. So using a tape measure, putting it around your waist, so where your belly button is, and measuring. And anyone sort of over that 100 centimeters, we're definitely assuming that there's some insulin resistance going on because there's been that fat deposit in the central abdomen area. If you were, say, less than 100 centimeters, but you were at like 98, 99, well, again, it's not in the optimal range. So it's something that we would assume, yeah, there's probably some insulin resistance going on there. Okay. So insulin resistance is inflammation. Okay. It provides a whole inflammatory effect, which I'm going to talk about a little bit as we go on. So what happens when you have this blood sugar spike, it will then, overload your cell with glucose. It will generate free radicals, which are like damaging things in your cells, okay? And what happens is the membrane of your cell, so the outside of your cell, will become damaged. The proteins inside of your cell can also become damaged. And your cells see this as an inflammatory signal, okay? And it starts the inflammation cascade. So if you think about your body, like our body is just entirely made up of cells. And if we look at all of our organs here, all of these are made up of cells. So if all of our cells are being bombarded with glucose and having the damaged membranes, the damaged protein, we're having a systemic effect of inflammation all throughout our body, okay? So things like ovaries, testes, uterus, all of that is going to be affected by blood glucose, okay? All right, so very quickly, whole body effects. We've got, thyroid, sluggish liver, fat storage, an increase in testosterone, or sometimes a decrease actually, low progesterone, or sometimes it can be high estrogen, which therefore affects the ratio of estrogen and progesterone. We get leaky gut. So we get a whole systemic effect of inflammation when we have a gut that's leaking and allowing toxins to go through our body. All right, so let's talk hormonally about what happens. So when we have too much insulin, so we've had a really big blood sugar spike, and we have a whole heap of insulin produced, then or secreted, it will then reduce a protein called sex hormone-binding globulin, or SHBG. So I'm going to explain what this means. Okay, I'm going to use the dots to help you understand. So we've got testosterone in blue, estrogen in pink, and orange sex hormone-binding globulin. And a little reminder there that this is the liver, because the liver is the one that helps to create sex hormone-binding globulin. Okay, so the job of SHBG is to bind up the free and active testosterone, estrogen, and the hormones in our blood, okay? But when we have the right amount, the leftover active testosterone and things will be bound by the sex hormone binding globulin. It's like putting in a car, seatbelt on, and it goes transported to the bloodstream. And the bloodstream will then take it to where it needs to go in the body. And sometimes that means it's taken to the liver to be, removed out of the body. But what happens then? So reminding you, too much insulin will then reduce sex hormone binding globulin. So we have less of this sex hormone binding globulin to bind onto the active estrogen and active testosterone. So now we have all of these active hormones in our bloodstream that shouldn't be active, that then wreak havoc on all of our hormones, okay? So this is really important and really a foundational thing if you're looking to conceive or you're looking to balance hormones, whether you're in perimenopause, menopause, whatever it is, this is really vital, okay? But so just like too much insulin from too many carbohydrates, not enough insulin will then increase sex hormone binding globulin, okay? So the balance is necessary. So now when we have too much, there's not enough active estrogen and not enough active testosterone. So we have all of these bound up and inactive are then going off to our bloodstream. So it can happen both ways. We need enough, so we need to eat carbohydrates and we need to have that constant fuel in our body, but too much can impact it, too little can impact it. So we get some pretty big changes with our hormones like acne, PCOS, so polycystic ovarian syndrome, hirsutism, something called unopposed estrogen, which you may have heard of this as estrogen dominance, meaning that relative to progesterone, there is too much estrogen. So we get some pretty profound changes in our body. All right, so in our bloodstream, what happens? So we get glucose in our bloodstream, goes to our cells to be used, goes to our muscles to be used or to be stored, goes to our liver to be stored as well. If we have bigger muscles, we have greater storage, we have a greater capacity to use the glucose, okay? There's more places for it to go with bigger muscles. So one of the first things that you can do to help improve your blood sugar is to do strength training, so to increase your muscle mass, okay? Or to just make sure that you're not living a very sedentary lifestyle. A sedentary lifestyle will mean muscle wastage, and therefore your muscles aren't effective in uptaking that glucose. But then we also have the liver as well. Okay, so let's talk about the liver, because the liver is so important. So when there's too much in storage, it can be stored as fat, and it can be stored as fat in our liver. Now, it is a normal healthy liver will be able to store glucose as glycogen. We need that to happen. Our liver will do this overnight. Our liver will access the storage overnight to ensure that when you're sleeping, that you have an adequate amount of glucose in your bloodstream at all times. But what happens? If we have this constant influx, our liver can become overwhelmed by the amount of storage, and it overwhelms the capacity of the liver, which can lead to something called fatty liver. Now, fatty liver has, or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, its name has changed to metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease. And so what we find is it's that sort of like that chicken or the egg, like which one comes first. So fatty liver can be a cause of insulin resistance, but it can also be a consequence of insulin resistance as well, okay? And then you can see, like, this is a liver, you can actually see the fatty deposits on it. And if we go back to here of, looking at increasing our muscle storage, like we can increase our muscles. We don't want our liver to be enlarged. Like our liver should not be enlarged, okay? But that's what we see with this fatty liver. We see a greater enlargement of our liver. Okay, so what happens? So even if we don't have diabetes, but perhaps we're getting this insulin resistant stage, what happens if our liver is overwhelmed? So this has a pretty, again, widespread effect. It can affect our skin. So our liver deals with our toxins. So if our liver's not being able to release toxins properly or able to deal with our excess cholesterol, we get things like high cholesterol, we get weight gain, we get imbalances in hormones, so whether it's like unopposed estrogen or free testosterone, we get low libido, anxiety disorders. Like it has a pretty systemic, widespread effect in our body. Okay, so why does it matter if the liver isn't working optimally? So your liver is a place where hormones are created. So it's not the only place, but creation of hormones does happen in the liver. It's where they're metabolized and it's where they're excreted from the body. If your liver isn't working properly with hormones, then we see the imbalances, okay? So our liver and insulin resistance is sort of closely tied together. All right, so we've said about muscle, increasing our muscle mass as well. All right, so let's talk about inflammation. So after a spike, the blood sugar can crash too low. Okay, so we saw that. That's when the roller coaster comes down and we get hyperglycemia where there's not enough glucose in the bloodstream. And when this happens, the body is stressed. It's like, oh no, we don't have enough blood sugar in our bloodstream, so it releases hormones called cortisol and adrenaline, okay? Now we need cortisol, we need adrenaline, but what we don't want is this constantly being released in our system. We don't want our system in this high stress state where we are constantly flooded with cortisol. So this is really important for us. Now, if we have too much cortisol, again, widespread effect. You get sick more often, brain fog, anxiety, trouble sleeping, slow digestion. We get cravings for sugar fat, we get weight gain, we get fat storage, the liver becomes sluggish. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was what happens when we don't have enough sleep. I'm just going to take some water. All right, so less sleep means more insulin resistance, because less sleep means we have higher cortisol. Our body's stressed, it's not rested. Okay, it produces more cortisol. Cortisol then has this effect of increasing blood sugar, which you then need more insulin, and then we get the roller coaster. Okay, so sleep plays a really big role in this. But also, insulin resistance can impact sleep. So oftentimes what would happen is I'll ask them about their sleep and they'll describe, oh yeah, I go to sleep, but then I wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and my mind's racing and I just can't get back to sleep. So let's explain this. So what happens is nighttime, okay, perhaps you've been sitting on the couch watching some Netflix, got your little sneaky snack, got some, bickies or some chippies, something pretty easily digestible, high carbohydrate. What happens is our blood sugar then will spike, okay, and it comes down. But what happens is it comes down when we're sleeping. And remember, what happens when it comes down? We get the cortisol. Now, if you're sleeping and you get a cortisol increase, automatically your brain thinks, without you even realizing, oh, there's a threat, it wakes you up. And that's where you get that racing mind and not being able to relax enough to go back to sleep, because we've got that cortisol in the body. So it sort of leads to this vicious cycle where we have this craving for these high glucose foods. Then we have the roller coaster increase and then crash. Because of that, we then get the crash at, when we're sleeping, it wakes us up. We're therefore tired and exhausted, can't go back to sleep. The lack of sleep then increases the stress hormones, cortisol. This then affects hunger hormones. We then have less insulin sensitivity. So therefore we have, bigger blood sugar roller coasters, and then we're craving food, and then we have the roller coasters, and it just goes round and round and again, round again, until we have that circuit breakout. Let's talk about it in relation to fertility. So we need sex hormone binding globulin, so what we were showing with the dots, to function adequately, so that we have the appropriate amount of free hormones in the body or in the bloodstream ready to go and do its job. And when there are imbalances in this, we get imbalances really throughout the whole system. So let's have a look at the menstrual cycle. I love this image. I think it's a beautiful image of showing all the things that happen throughout our menstrual cycle. So we start with a bleed, okay, and then over time the uterine lining will increase. We've got our interplay of hormones there. And then we've got our ovarian follicles, which is showing how, what happens when we ovulate and how that develops, and then what happens afterwards. So at the beginning of our cycle, when we're bleeding, our ovarian follicles will start to develop and develop over time. Now, the typical day they say is around that day 14 where we ovulate, but we're not robots. Not everyone will ovulate on that day 14 exactly. So what happens is we get a beautiful rise in this LH hormone, and that follicle stimulating hormone is increasing to help stimulate the release of the follicles, okay, and the growth of the follicles, okay? Once the egg is released, we get the corpus luteum. Now, the corpus luteum plays a really important role. That helps to supply the progesterone, which we see as this line here, to help sustain and support a pregnancy, okay? But here's the thing. Blood sugar, if we have constant interruptions, these roller coasters of blood sugar, this disruptive sort of environment, the development of the ovarian follicles don't develop like they should, okay? So we have, if you remember about the cell membranes aren't as great as they should be. There's damage to them. There's damage to the proteins. So we've got a bit of an inflammatory thing going on with our ovulation. And so therefore, the health of the corpus luteum is not as healthy as what it could be. And therefore, we don't get that beautiful rise in progesterone like we should. So oftentimes I see people talking about, oh, I want to increase my progesterone. Okay, but to do that, that comes from your follicles. And that comes from this interplay of LH and FSH and the integrity of the cells in your follicles. And if they're constantly overloaded by glucose, how can you have a healthy ovulation? And if you don't have a healthy ovulation, how do you have a healthy corpus luteum? How do you have a healthy rise in progesterone? So getting the balance is really important, and supporting the cells in this process is really important. But furthermore too, that if you can remember back to the dots, and that's role of the sex hormone binding globulin, and binding up the free estrogen. If we have too much estrogen in this second phase here, so you can see that estrogen takes a dip and then is not as high as progesterone. But what can happen is if we have too much free estrogen, we can have our estrogen much higher than what our progesterone is. So it really matters. And progesterone is more than, like, even if you're not thinking about fertility, it's more than just supporting a pregnancy. It's a feel-good hormone. So if you're not getting that beautiful rise in progesterone in that second half, that luteal phase of your cycle, then you're going to see things like sadness before your period, or sadness in that week before. And this is like essential. And blood sugar plays a huge role in this, in making sure that we have stable moods throughout our cycle. And it's really common for women to have these PMS symptoms before their period comes, but actually it's not necessarily healthy. It's not indicative of a healthy cycle, okay, if we're having these extreme symptoms before our period starts. And really, as soon as we hear that, we're thinking, okay, this balance between estrogen and progesterone, what's the health of the ovulation like? And it's all connected, okay? Okay, so to explain it a little bit more, so this hormone LH and FSH, that comes from our brain, it comes from our hypothalamus, which secretes something called gonadotropin releasing hormone. It works on our anterior pituitary, it releases LH and FSH. And then that works on the gonads. So in women, that's the ovaries, okay, which then helps to create estrogen and progesterone. But if we're constantly flooding our cells with glucose, that communication between these steps is impaired, and we don't get the communication like we want to. And so therefore, things like LH and FSH is maybe disrupted, or maybe it's delayed. So you can see here this yellow line, LH, to get that rise just before ovulation to help that egg erupt out of the follicle. We need LH. So if that communication is disrupted, we don't get the LH, or the luteinizing hormone, increase. And therefore we see things where, like in polycystic ovarian syndrome, where instead of your cycle where you ovulate around that 14-day mark, we see it ovulating around that 30-day mark, okay? But, LH and FSH helps to create estrogen and progesterone. So we can't just say, oh, I've got to fix my luteinizing hormone. Like, it all works together, okay? But also, we also see sometimes when cycles are too short, so with not enough progesterone to sustain the amount of, time to keep a pregnancy there, and therefore then menstruation starts earlier than we would like to see it. Also, like increased risk of miscarriage. So when our cells are constantly bombarded by glucose, and remember, that includes the cells in our uterus, okay, and in our ovaries and fallopian tube. So what happens is we get a greater susceptibility to tubal infections. We get elevated oxidative stress. We get the presence of immune cells. We get impaired cilia beating, so the finger-like projections when so on the fallopian tube, these are like the little legs, like kicking a soccer ball, kicking the embryo down, or the egg down into the uterus where it can be fertilized and implanted. So That's where things like ectopic pregnancies can happen because there's this damage in the cellular functions within the fallopian tubes. We also get things like increased progression of tubal endometriosis, changes in the metabolism of the epithelial cells, so the lining of the uterus. We get, the receptivity of the endometrial lining is impaired. So how well that the uterus can actually receive and, make sure that that embryo is implanted in the uterus. And like one thing I think a lot of people don't understand is that the immune system also is in our uterus. So if you've got, you're repeatedly not being able to get pregnant, is it perhaps that there's an overactive immune system in your uterus that is recognizing an embryo or recognizing an egg as a foreign thing and therefore working to destroy it rather than having it as a place that creates life and supports life? So a lot of things that happen because our cells have too much glucose. There was a cool study done where scientists had some mice. They injected the mice right into the lining of the uterus. They injected it with a glucose solution to mimic what it's like when the cells are overloaded with glucose. And then this is what happened. So there was a major decrease in implantation compared with the mice who didn't get this glucose solution, and reduced proteins in the uterus. So reduced proteins that are helping to allow these, the embryo to implant and to grow and be healthy. So pretty crazy, right? Like it has a pretty profound effect on our uterus. Okay, as well as increased risk of miscarriage. And that's because when you're pregnant, there's some remodeling that goes on in your uterus because we need a greater blood flow. We need blood flow in our uterus to be able to support a pregnancy, to give it nutrients, to give it, make sure that there's that constant blood supply for oxygen and all the things that are going to help a pregnancy survive. So we can see here, this is no pregnancy. This is the remodeling that happens when you have a pregnancy. But this is what happens here if it's impaired. And one of the things that can impair this is, you guessed it, blood glucose. So we don't get that constant blood supply to the uterus. Therefore, the baby's not getting enough nutrients, enough blood flow, and it's not able to continue to carry to life. Okay. All right. Perimenopause, same thing. And I'm going to briefly just go over this. So things like your vasomotor symptoms, so your hot flushes, your temperature, your night sweats, psychological effects, so mood swings, depression, anxiety, neurological systems, so like cognitive deficits, brain fog, all of those things, it's all amplified by blood glucose or dysregulation of blood glucose. Same with menopause. What happens during that transition when in that menopause time, estrogen will drop. Estrogen is actually quite protective to insulin resistance. So the less estrogen, the more sensitive. So the less the more insulin resistant you are, the less sensitive you are to insulin. Therefore, more inflammation, more cortisol. That then increases the inflammation. We get increased symptoms and it starts again. So unless, of course, we disrupt that cycle. Okay, so what now? All right, so I think I've made my point that glucose matters for hormones. So, all right, what do we do? What are we doing now? How are you going to fix this? All right, so what causes this? So skipping meals. So people who will fast all day long, eat then at 3 p.m. and eat. You are sending yourselves in a complete decrease of blood sugar, where it's going in that hyperglycemic state. Eating too much of carbohydrates and sugar and processed foods. Even still eating too many complex carbohydrates, which I'll get to. Eating too much fat, so processed trans fats, can lead to inflammation in the liver. Therefore, it's that, the egg or the chicken, the liver's inflamed. It contributes to that insulin resistance. High stress because of that increase of cortisol, which will then increase blood glucose. Poor sleep, again, sedentary lifestyle, all of these things. So I want to talk about how like reducing the easy energy foods is the easiest and most simple way to start. So the things like cereals, white breads, sugary drinks, processed snacks, things like rice. Now, I'm not someone who says never, never, never. I eat rice, but I eat in a way that supports that. And I'll get to that in a second. So we need carbohydrates. This is not a bashing about carbohydrates and how carbohydrates aren't great for you. They are, but what happens is if we have too many versus, other supportive things for blood glucose. All right. So simple carbs are the ones that are refined, they're processed, most of the protein's been removed, the fiber's been removed, very easily digestible, blood sugar goes up immediately after having them. Versus complex carbs, which are our like vegetables, things with more protein and more fiber. So you can see, all right, there's bread on both of them, but this bread is a whole grain bread. It's perhaps a rye bread, and therefore it has far more protein, far more fiber as part of it as well. So one of the things that we can do, we can include protein in every single meal. So most of the time we see people eating breakfast, like 2 pieces of toast, hardly any protein, okay? That's not going to support you for great blood sugar regulation. Protein, it takes longer to digest than simple carbohydrates, which then slows down how fast glucose will enter the bloodstream. It also, eating protein will trigger the release of hormones that balance blood sugar. So I haven't actually mentioned those today, but just know that there are proteins that help with that, and protein helps to release those. Protein makes you feel full for longer. So if you're full, you're so much less likely to snack on high sugar foods, which cause those blood sugar swings. Okay, eating fat. I feel like fat's been demonized a long time. And when I'm saying eat fat, I'm saying eating whole food sources of fat. So things like nuts and seeds, avocado, coconut milk, coconut cream, olive oil. And when we eat it alongside a carb, because fats won't actually spike your blood sugar, but when we eat it alongside a carb, it helps to slow that gastric emptying. It helps to slow the digestion and to slow down the release of glucose. Okay, so fat is important, just not too much and not the wrong types. So again, my diet's high in processed fats triggers chronic inflammation as well, talking about that liver part as well. So, but I can still be eating excess dietary fat. So I can be eating nuts all day long, and yes, they're healthy, but we don't, if we're overloading our system with fat, that can also help to reduce our ability to be able to regulate our blood sugar as well. Okay. All right. So one of the easiest things that you can do is obviously including fiber on your plate. But secondary to that is the order in which we eat our food. So here's a meal here. I've got some brown rice and quinoa, some chicken with some, I think it was some mingle seasoning, and some coconut milk, so some fat, and lots of fibrous veggies. So when I'm eating a meal, my first thing that I'll eat is my fibrous veggies. And I always start with that. Okay. Now, I'm not strict, as in I don't go down right to the last bean and cucumber and then start on my meat, but I will eat a really good portion of that before I start on anything else. Okay. So I might eat, say, for example, like half of my beans, or 2 pieces of my broccoli, and then start eating on my meat and my brown rice. Okay. I'm just going to pause the recording because my dog has just started barking, and that will continue. Oh no. Okay. I think she's good. All right. So the order in which you eat is really, really important, and I think is the most understated thing that you can do to help your blood glucose. And I think it's the easiest thing that you can do. And one of the ways you can do that is with the starter salad. Okay. So the fiber in the veggies will create a gel-like barrier in your gut, which helps to slow the release and slow the gastric emptying. Okay. So this can reduce your glucose spikes by up to 30 to 40%. So just by starting with a starter salad, it's so powerful. And so this will work with things like your non-starchy vegetables, okay? So not things like a potato salad, things like spinach, rocket, cucumber, tomato, capsicum, fennel, leafy greens, all of those things, broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, those like really fibrous veggies, okay? And I mean, you get the added benefit of it's going to support your digestion by feeding the good bacteria in your gut. My biggest tip is like, don't overcomplicate this. Like, you don't have to spend an hour preparing an incredible salad. Like, just have things in your fridge that are easy to get, easy to access, easy to quickly make into a starter salad. So most of the time I'll cook leftover greens. So I have leftovers from the night before, chuck that in. But if I don't, like, I generally try to have cucumber, I try to have some capsicum, and I try to have some sort of leaves, and I put that in a bowl, chop it all up and eat it. And like, that is the easiest way to get you to have your blood sugar regulated. And like, it takes less than 2 minutes to just quickly, like, there's nothing pretty about it, just chuck it in and eat it. All right, so a perfect meal is the combination of protein, a whole food fat source, some carbohydrates, and then some fiber, okay? So fiber obviously being those starchy veggies. So let's look at some, meals that I typically see. So lots of people, when they first come to see me, ask me about their breakfast, and they say they'll have a couple of pieces of toast with jam. And like, no judgments, because I've been there. That was, my breakfast my entire life. Instead of jam, though, it was Vegemite. Hold on one second. All right. So toast, usually white toast, it's broken down really quickly by the system. It enters the bloodstream really, really quickly. Then you have this increase in blood glucose very, very quickly. Okay, it gets the spike. Okay, but what happens? Because a lot of times people will say, oh, but I don't want to necessarily change all my meals. Okay, so we don't change it. We add something with protein and fiber. So like Greek yogurt. So if you started your meal with your protein and your fat from your Greek yogurt, and then you had your toast, your blood sugar is going to be less because you've started with the fat and the protein, okay, which helps to delay that, that process of the blood sugar entering into your bloodstream. So you can see the difference in the carbohydrates here, like significantly less with the Greek yogurt, significantly more protein and more fiber. I mean, to make this even better, we add more fiber. We add some berries, some nuts and seeds, which is going to add more protein, more fat, okay? All right, so again, why does it matter? Okay, slows digestion down. Let's see. Okay, so this is a different meal now, saying like 2 eggs, some black beans, and a piece of toast. We can see the difference between the carbohydrates, the protein, the fat, and the fiber. Now, you might think, oh, I don't like black beans. I don't want to eat that for breakfast. Okay, that's fine. Just an example of how you're increasing the protein and the fiber, and how that really changes the ratio of what we eat, and therefore it's going to change the amount of blood glucose in our system. Okay, so again, comparing that, I mean, look at the difference there. Way more protein, way more, so way less carbohydrates, way more fiber and fat as well. Okay, oats is one of those ones that most people are confused with, because it's, it's healthy. But what happens is modern convenience has changed the way that 100 years ago we would have eaten oats. So we've got things like the sachet packets, okay? They've been stripped of their protein, therefore stripped of nutrients, stripped of fiber, because it makes it really easy to quick and, heat it up in the microwave, done 2 minutes. So that's what happens if we swap that. So if we use rolled oats. Now, ideally, if you're going to have oats, I'd prefer to use steel oats. The food system software that I was using didn't have steel cut oats, which was annoying. So I've used this as rolled oats. But, okay, so sachet oats with milk, we've got 56% carbohydrate. Over here, I mean, let's have a look. We've got, I've just realized I haven't. That's wrong. That's okay. So significantly less carbohydrate, more protein, more fat, more fiber, okay? This is going to be a far more stabilizing blood glucose than the sachet. Now you can do something extra. You can crack an egg into your rolled oats and stir it in once it's cooked, and it makes this beautiful, it doesn't go scrambled, it makes it like quite custardy. That's going to increase the protein. Adding some nuts and seeds to your porridge is going to make it so much more blood glucose stabilizing than just a straight up porridge and milk and honey. All right, so anytime I think of a meal, I'm thinking, how do we add fiber? How do we add protein? How do we add a little fat? Can I choose a complex carbohydrate? Can I reduce the amount of carbohydrates? So let's look at the humble cheese toastie. All right, so to make this more glucose friendly, we could swap the bread. So instead of having white bread, we swap it to a rye bread or a whole grain bread, or like my favorite is a buckwheat and chia loaf that we get by Gluten-Free Precinct. So much more fiber, so much more protein, going to be better for you in the long run, as well as for our glucose. Now, okay, let's say we change the bread. Let's add more fiber. So could we have a starter salad before it? Could you add some tomato to it and some lettuce as well? Can you add some other leftover veggies to your cheese toastie? Can we increase the protein? So can we add some leftover meat from the night before? Or if you know you're going to have a cheese toastie over and over again throughout the week, like prepare for that. So on a Monday night or a Sunday night, create some meat, cook some meat that you're going to add to your cheese toasties. Okay, now the last question, can we reduce the carbohydrates? Okay, so could you, instead of having the 2 pieces of toast, could you have the one with the veggies, tomato, and then the cheese on top, or in the leftover meat, cheese on top? So therefore, the ratio of carbohydrates is less. So do you see how it's not always about like, oh, never, never, never eat that. It's about what changes can we make? Can we swap things? Can we add things to make it more stabilizing? So when I am choosing a meal, I'm thinking, what's my complex carbohydrate? What's my protein going to be? What's my fat going to be? And what's my fiber? And that's generally how I will create a meal. So some easy hacks to take with you. So number 1, eating whole food, trying to minimize the processed stuff. That's, generally going to do you better anyway for blood sugar. Focusing on fiber. Can you add some chia seeds? Can you add some flax? Can you add some lentils? Can you add extra vegetables? Can you add a piece of fruit? Okay. Prioritizing sleep, like so important. Like resting where you can, even if you've got young children. Like I know what that's like, particularly at the minute, my 2-year-old's not sleeping very much. But it would be made worse if I was, scrolling on my phone for 5 hours before bed and going to bed at midnight instead of, 9 o'clock. So you get sleep where you can and rest where you can. So I want to take you through a case study. So I had someone come to see me at the clinic, female, 31, had 3 kids, works part-time from home, so is juggling the life between kids and work and all of that. Very, very heavy periods, leaking through pads, leaking through undies overnight. Had to change sheets every morning when her period started. But not only that, it was really painful. It was debilitating. She found that those first 3 days, she'd pretty much just have to drudge her way through life. So she came to see me, and I sent her off for some blood tests. Her blood glucose was nearly at a pre-diabetic range. She was anemic, so incredibly low iron, and we already knew about her thyroid issues, but we got some more information about that, and that was an ongoing issue for her since pregnancy. Okay, what we did, we changed her breakfast, so we made sure we had protein and fiber. We made personalized meal plans just for her to support her lifestyle with kids, she's busy, she's working, but we also made those meal plans specifically for helping her iron metabolism, supporting her blood glucose and nutrients that support thyroid, and really using that like food as medicine to help give the thyroid the nutrients it needed to be able to help it heal and get it back to better levels. reducing inflammation, obviously, through the food choices that we were making. And then, we found targeted supplements specifically to help with blood glucose, because there are specific nutrients which can help with blood glucose when you're in that, near diabetic range. That can be a really good choice that we can make to help support that with supplements. And then obviously things to help with her iron and thyroid as well. Okay, so what happened? So within 6 weeks, her first period in 4 years that had no cramping, no heavy bleeding. She had less cravings. She felt like she was eating with purpose, so that what she was doing, she was felt like she was in tune with her body, and that she could choose foods that could support, thyroid and iron and her hormones. She felt full and satisfied. Now, within 3 months, she reported back and was like, all of these things had stayed the same, but also better moods and an increased libido, which, I mean, who doesn't want to have a healthy sex drive, to have that connection and love with your partner? All right, so someone else, I had a male come in, 39, 4 kids, was a tradie, came to me because he had started having panic attacks and had pretty extreme low mood, low energy. And his main thing was he just felt like he could not cope with stress like he used to. And he felt like his resilience with stress was reduced. And also had grown a pretty unhealthy dependence on alcohol to sort of, help get him through that stress. So he'd tried cutting alcohol for 3 months, and he just nothing had changed. He'd had, panic attack, had this really low energy and low mood. So what we did, I spent a lot of time with him in that initial consultation, really mapping out what each of the things that he was doing and how that was related to all of his symptoms. So things like the low mood, the panic attacks, okay? And he has told me that was the most helpful thing, because he was able to understand what the behaviors were doing and how that was impacting his body. We drastically reduced fast food diet. So things like no more sugary drinks, no more, going to the servo for your lunch, you're packing your lunch. And we come up with a really personalized nutrition plan for him that worked for him, because he's a tradie, he's on the go, he has, pretty high energy needs. He, was feeling like he didn't want to be overwhelmed and have to cook 700 things. He wanted to be simple and nutritious and to, see some change pretty quickly. So that was top of mind for him, in that it had to be simple. We then had 2 supplements to target his mood, inflammation, and really to target the damage that had been done over time by the alcohol as well. Within 1 week, the feedback that I got from him, he couldn't believe how much his energy had increased and mental clarity. He said it was just so obvious, and he thought that would come from stopping the alcohol, but he realized obviously there was so much more than just the alcohol going on that was contributing to this, really low mood. Within 3 months, so hasn't had a panic attack since, felt like his stress tolerance had returned and his mood had returned, and energy had been sustained. Could get through a workday and not feel like he had to lay on the couch and just scroll through his phone for the rest of the evening. So I'm wondering if there's been any time throughout this whole masterclass that you're thinking, oh, this is me. So perhaps you're looking for more energy. Perhaps you're looking for regulated cycles. Perhaps you're wanting to give yourself the absolute best chance for fertility. Perhaps you're wanting to have more energy for your family. Perhaps you're wanting better moods, wanting to stop the craving, wanting to snack all day long. Or perhaps you're just missing that vitality to life. So I'm going to go through my offers now of the packages that I offer for you to be able to work with me. So I offer 2 packages, and one is the deluxe, which I'll share first, and one is the more basic package, okay? So the deluxe package, what this comes with is we have an initial consultation, which is an extended period of time where we really go over your entire health history, and we go through your digestion, we go through all relevant body systems.
Okay. And we do this deep dive. Like, I want to know what your childhood health was like. I want to know, what has happened to lead us up to this point where you are now. Okay. We work out what your goals are, what's worked for you or what's not worked for you is more often the case. And within this package, then I also offer the 3 follow-up sessions within this 3-month period. Okay, so it's quite an intensive, like getting you on board, making sure that we're following through and that we're seeing progress. Okay, so those follow-up sessions are really to make sure, review the progress, tweak things if we need to, and help you to stay on track. And as the healing process happens, perhaps things need to be tweaked as well. So with this, I give very personalized nutrition plans based on your taste buds, what you like to do, your daily routine, your energy needs. And I've really focused on promoting blood sugar regulation, gut health, helping that hormonal balance. Whether you're male or female, we need that hormonal balance. Included in this is the time spent on blood test analysis, so going through your recent labs, perhaps suggesting you to go and get some more, and doing a bit of a key deep dive into certain blood markers that are relevant to what is going on for you. And it's the analysis of that as well. So what's included in this is the 3 months of instant message coaching. So this is the package for someone who wants that really supportive coaching environment. So someone who, really thrives on there being someone to check in with, to keep them on track, to answer questions, maybe to allay some concerns, to just be there every step of the way for you and to help mitigate those little things. So it might be that, you message at the end of the day and we're like, hey, okay, here's what I ate. But I found this really, really struggled with this. That's where I can come in and I can fix it on the spot and say, oh, well, have you tried doing this? So instead of it being like your progress halted and then you have to wait a few weeks to come and speak to me, this is a much more like dynamic relationship where it's that coaching relationship where I can really help you in the moment so that, we're not going backwards. As well as included into this, I have a STEM community, which has lots of recipes, added masterclasses, meal inspiration, relaxation resources, and, I'm constantly updating that to help keep you supported throughout sessions as well. So the cost of this one is $775, and you can pay that upfront, or we can come up with a negotiation for payment plans. So it might be, you could do $67 per week for 12 weeks, or we do, $200 upfront, and then we do a payment plan from there. So a deposit. So it's up to you, how you wanted to move forward with that. The more basic option that I give is all the same things. The only thing that's missing is there's not that 3 months of texting, that Telegram support. So this is for someone who feels like they can go away, make the changes, problem solve by themselves, who feel like they don't need that constant check-in, and don't need that extra support. So this one is $550, and that includes the 4 appointments, and the blood tests, the personalized nutrition plans, and the access to the STAN community as well. Okay, so again, we can come to an arrangement of a payment plan. So whether that was upfront, or you could do $47 per week for 12 weeks, or we do that, again, pay deposit, and then we can do a weekly amount from there. So those are the ways that you can work with me. I really, really prioritize a package rather than individual consults, because I am the type of person, I want you to have results. I want there to be that communication between us. And, I think if we just have, one-to-one appointments, then I don't get to, there's not that follow-up. And yeah, so I really make sure that the package is something that I offer. All right, so questions. Now, obviously this is not live. So if you have any questions about the packages, questions about any of the content, please message me on Instagram. You know where to find me.
I love a good question. I feel like I give my time freely on there. I love to, talk to people about what they're going through. So if there's any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, and we're going to stop there for now.